So we're going to go for about 25 minutes. I'd like to do it this way, though. And what Robert said, the short version is, don't make speeches. Okay? I just made a long speech. Don't make them. I'm going to ask you now to talk to your neighbors again and come up with a question that your group wants to ask. And we're going to take questions that way. Okay? You want to talk now. You've been sitting there for a long time. If you need to get up and stretch, that's okay. But talk to your neighbors and see what kind of question you want to ask as a group.
And when we're done, we'll do some announcements about some other things. Come on.
Interesting how they remind me. I was going to say hi to a couple of people.
I got it.
Will you be posting this?
I am going to, yes. Yes.
That's the way where we'll be on.
I'll probably put up an oil feature maybe even as early as tomorrow.
Okay. And
I can send you a link directly to it.
how do we contribute to without PayPal, or do we just have to bite the bullet?
No, I think you can mail me if you wanted to. I mean, I can do that if you like. Some people have sent me checks for that.
Okay, you want to give me an address?
Sure, 26. It's AHL. Yeah, Swedish, right?
Okay.
26.
Here we go.
OGDEN.
How many people need more time? Need more time?
Providence.
Street?
Oh, street, yes. And that's 02906.
Okay, good. So I want to take 2 or 3 questions, and I'm asking you to be brief, and I know I just kind of went on for a while, but I'm going to try to be brief too. So let's take 2 or 3 questions. Right here.
Why do you think Paul Krugman and 3 supposedly liberal economists attacked Gerald Friedman's economic analysis, which is the basis of Bernie's programs?
Okay, so the question is, why would Paul Krugman, supposedly, I'm going to use progressive economic analyst, attack Jerry Friedman's analysis of the Sanders program? I'll come back to that. So let's take a couple more. Al, you don't want to do it that way? Are there any companies in the United States that practice something like the economic democracy that I just mentioned? Yeah. Another one. Yeah.
One of the things that Bernie says is that he's going to fund all of this, raise all this money that he needs by taxing the, what do you call it, speculation on Wall Street. I don't really understand what that means, how much that generates, and how that would work.
Okay. So I'm going to take these 3, and then we'll take a bunch more. Okay. Let me start over here. Krugman is a mainstream economist. Okay. He's a Keynesian, so he believes in social democracy. Right. He believes that the government can do things to make capitalism work better. But he's also in a position of privilege. Up until last year, he taught at Princeton. Before that, he taught at MIT. Before that, he taught at Stanford. And he got his graduate degree from MIT. And economists at that level are protective of their tribal privileges. Okay? So only some people get to say certain things. And my friend, Jerry Friedman at UMass, who by the way has a PhD from Harvard, but he's at UMass. He's at, it's a place like this, a little bigger, but so he's not part of the club. And the interesting thing, he's not part of the club. And and besides which, if you've been reading Krugman carefully, he's for Hillary, okay? As is Alan Kruger and the other people who signed that letter, who clearly did not read Jerry's report, okay? Now what Jerry did was brilliant, right? He used very mainstream methodology. He used the same methodology that the Congressional Budget Office uses. There's nothing radical about Jerry's analysis at all. He made some assumptions that maybe one could argue with, but essentially what he's arguing is that the Sanders program will put us back on the growth path that we were on before 2007. Why does he think we could do that? Because Bernie's program is big. He's proposing big things. He's not proposing tinkering around the edges. He's proposing big increases in spending that will mainly benefit people at the lower income levels. He's proposing really stimulating the economy in a way that the Obama administration, for whatever reason, didn't feel like they could do. So Krugman is trying to protect his professional privilege. He is a boundary keeper. Sorry, that's the way it is. This tax, and I'll come to the other question. Sometimes it's referred to as the Tobin tax. It was first discussed by an economist named James Tobin, who taught at Yale for many, many years, also a follower of Keynes. And the idea is that, in some sense, financial markets are too efficient. In other words, there's too much trading going on, that a lot of it is speculation. You know, gambling on what's going to happen to this price tomorrow with no obvious benefit to the real economy, right? And sometimes the speculation is destructive, right? So if we could slow trading down a little bit by putting a very small tax, maybe 1/4%, maybe less than that, it would have two benefits. One is it would raise some money. And the other is it might tamper down the speculative trading in the financial markets. Now this idea, and this is true of a lot of ideas, and I hope you got this out of the presentation, that things that were very, very radical in the 19th century, like the minimum wage, we now just take for granted. When I was in graduate school in the 80s, this was a very radical idea, this Tobin tax. It was surprising that a mainstream guy like James Tobin came up with it. So nobody thought that, well, they have it in England. They have it in other countries in Europe. We could have it. This could happen. And, you know, what would happen is, like a lot of these things, people would scream that this is going to destroy capitalism, it's going to be awful, it's going to destroy American power and finance and blah, blah, and then it would be opposed, and the next day, nothing. We just go on as if almost nothing happened. So that's what it is. There are more companies that you might know that are cooperatively organized. There is a major retail chain, supermarket chain in the Midwest. In certain pockets, like in Seattle, in Cleveland, there are fairly large numbers of cooperatively organized enterprises. Relative to the size of the U.S. economy, though, there's not that many. It's more prevalent in countries like Argentina, Spain, France, the Latin countries. It has to do with the long history of anarchism in those countries, that socialism tended to take the form of anarchism, that the anarchists hated the state as much as they hated the capitalists. And so in those countries, there was always a desire not to have state socialism, but to have some kind of worker-controlled system. But it's growing. There's a major hospital in New York City that's now cooperative. My daughter's little, tiny timber frame home building company just went cooperative. I'm going to Cuba next year. I work with somebody in Havana who are they are trying to develop cooperative enterprises as an alternative to state-owned enterprises in Cuba. I'm also working with some people in France who are doing this. So it's kind of under the radar in the United States, but it's more prevalent than you might think. And I could send you, if you leave me your email, I could send you some sources to see where this is happening. Let's take 2 or 3 more. Yeah, Charles.
What do you say to people who say that, well, when Bernie becomes president, he really won't be able to govern because, every Democratic congressman has endorsed Hillary. And what do you say to these folks?
All right, that's a good one. Let me take a couple more. Yeah, right here.
I'm interested in when the Bernie campaign is over, win or lose, like what do we actually do when we wake up to further the movement for democratic socialism? I think you present a lot of great ideas about what democratic socialism is, but it's a movement, it's a political struggle. It's not just an idea that sounds, peachy.
Absolutely.
Can socialism work in the United States with its diversity of population, its heterogeneity, or
Okay. Can Obama govern? Can Obama govern?
He's trying to.
Yeah, it's hard, though.
What has happened to his the Supreme Court appointment?
He's going to beat him.
It's going to beat him. Okay. Well, then, if you have confidence there, then you should have confidence that we're Bernie to win. On the day he wins, all those Democratic congressmen and senators who support Hillary now will line up behind Bernie because they like power and they're attracted to power. So I'm not worried about that at all. Can the Republicans be any worse
Yes.
with Bernie than they've been with Obama? I don't think so. Now the key is, let's suppose Bernie gets the nomination. Okay, can the Senate change hands?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's very important. Can the House, right? If you're really going to do this, listen, the Social Democrats in Sweden had 40 years. So this is a political struggle. And it's not going to end at the Democratic Convention or in November at the election. It's going to go on for a long time. So, what's that?
It has to.
Okay, I don't worry about that
But I
for a
mean-
second.
There's no, really, I do believe that it's a future to believe in, and everything else, I fear for my 7-year-old.
You should.
Future.
You should fear for your
There's
7-year-old.
other-
But you know this, Troy. I mean, you know politicians. You probably know people in Congress and in the Senate. I mean, the day he gets the nomination, they'll line up right behind him. Not a problem.
So will the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
Because those Republicans know they're not going to get reelected.
I think so.
With Trump, and I hope and pray that Trump gets the Republican.
Be careful what you hope for. Be very, very careful what you hope for. Be very careful.
I hope he gets.
Let me do this one and then you look. I'm not a politician and I'm not an organizer, okay? I do what I do. I'm an academic, I read and write, I teach. So I'm not somebody who's going to, lead a movement. There are people in this room who already are. I mean, there are people in this room who have been organizing and doing stuff every day to try to get Bernie elected. And they're going to have to figure out where this movement goes from here. One of the problems in the United States is we don't have an institutionalized left. In other words, we don't have newspapers, magazines, clubs. We don't have a party. Bernie's not even a Democrat, right? So we lack the institutions that create continuity on the left. And we need to build those. Go ahead.
I'll just say that we have started a Democratic Socialist America branch, or restarted a Democratic Socialist America branch in Providence. Where primarily the people who live down there. If people are interested, the campaign's going to end. I'm out there. I've been canvassing in New Hampshire, working in Massachusetts. The campaign's going to end, and what do we do with all the energy? DSA has a long history. It's a very democratic organization. It's exciting. There's young people. There's old people. It's national. Look us up. Come talk to me afterwards. We need an institutional left, and political campaigns don't do it. We don't want everyone to go home after the election's done.
Okay, we
There
said no
also-
speeches, but that was important, so.
Hey, Rick,
I think that, you know, and you hear this, I mean, Bernie mentioned Denmark, and people say Denmark is this little tiny country, it's ethnically homogeneous, but you know, the Nordic countries together are not a big group, but Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden together have had social democracy now for a long time. In the United States, I think this heterogeneity thing is code. It means we don't want the black people to have it. Now, nobody wants to say that, right? But to me, the dividing line in this country is race. It is now, it has been forever. And, you know, we've got to get over this. We have to deal with it. There are, I mean, think about the following, okay? We say we want an equal opportunity for all children. And then we fund the schools based on property taxes. Now, that's like we're going to take the poorest kids and we're going to put them 40 feet behind the starting line. Now, if I said we should equalize funding for all school districts, and in fact, to really make it an equal start, we ought to give more to the poor school districts, which we really should. The people in Barrington, and they're probably very nice people, they pet their dogs, they love their children, but the people in Barrington would rather blow up their schools than do that, okay? We have a problem in which we think some people are deserving and other people are undeserving. And it breaks down usually around race. So, I mean, I don't have a good answer for you. I think that was the dividing line in the 1930s. I'm not sure it's any less of a dividing line now, except to talk about it, to make it explicit, to say it, is the only thing I know how to do, given I'm not political, I do what I do. But I think, oh, you can't have it here because we're too heterogeneous. It means you don't want black people to have anything. And brown people too. They can have a little of the brown ones. But not too much. Let's take a few more. Yeah, in the back.
Oh, no, I'm nervous.
Don't be nervous. It's okay.
So it seems like there's a large portion of the population that tends to vote against their own self-interest.
Yeah.
A lot of them probably Republicans who are very afraid of the word socialism. They probably don't understand it and would benefit from
Right.
the things that you've talked about tonight and Bernie Sanders talks about. So how do you turn that, or how does he turn that, or how do we turn that to sort of get them to understand that these things are in their best interest and would benefit them and all of us? How do you turn that?
Okay, that's a really good question. Let me take a couple more and come back to it. Okay, that's really good. Yeah.
Now, how do you think Bernie can overcome Hillary's ability to convince people that she's more for the black and LGBT communities? There seems to be a Hillary seems to have power in that.
Okay, that's a very different topic, but I can do it. Yep.
I'm more concerned about Trump. I think he's going to be the nominee, and I think 40% of the population who will vote for him without even thinking. I think that's true. I think that the dividing line that you're talking about race is operative in people who are racist, misogynistic, and afraid. They're afraid of the brown people who are coming to bomb them, and that their guns are going to be taken away. So I look at Trump and I think he could win.
Oh, you could win. There's no question you could win.
And then our world turns into, you're fired, you're fired.
Wow. We already have that world. That's the world we now live in. Let me take one more. Sally?
This was just an observation.
Yeah.
Where you're saying that race is the killer.
I think it is.
But I look as a generation, I mean, the baby boomers now are outnumbered by you guys. And I think, is it naive of me to feel such hope in...
Pick up, please.
I feel such hope in this next generation coming up. I think they're more tolerant. I think
They're gonna vote for Bernie, hopefully. And they could knock out that 40% swamp stuff coming down the line. I mean, I don't think they're as, I don't know, you're their city, but I just.
Okay, so, okay, there was this book a few years ago, What's the Matter with Kansas, all right? And the analysis was that because Kansas is a very red state, and yeah, there's a lot of working class people in Kansas. And so the argument was that they vote against their own interests because they're dominated by ideology or something. There's a political scientist named Larry Bartels who wrote a book a couple of years later and went through that same data. And what he found was it's entirely a Southern phenomenon. In other words, the Democratic Party has lost, not the white working class, but the Southern white working class. It's a Southern, for the most part. Now, it's a Southern problem. Now, I have neighbors who are working class people who would not vote for a Democrat if there was no one else running. They wouldn't vote for them. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen here, but for the most part, this is an issue of the South. To build off what Sally said, there are people in our age group who the world has just changed too much. It's changed too much. There's gay people now. There never used to be gay people. Nobody was gay in the 70s. And you have a black president. And of course, I'm not a racist, but you know what I'm saying. The world is just, gay people are getting married, and it's too hard. It's too hard. We had neighbors who were much better off with Obama than they would have been with Romney or McCain. And one of the neighbors actually cried. Isn't that true? Cried when Obama won because it was just so sad. So I think the cultural change is too hard for some older people to handle. But in terms of the white working class as a whole, it's mostly a Southern phenomenon. And so I think it's to some extent been overblown. The white working class, because of God's guns and glory, they're now Republican. And it's remarkable that they were solidly Democratic because of race for 100 some odd years, and now they're solidly Republican, again because of race mostly. What was the other? There was another. Bernie's doing fine. He's doing fine. I mean, people in organizations that have long been tied to the Clintons are going to vote for Hillary. They're just going to do that. And Bernie's just got to keep pounding on that door. He's genuinely anti-racist throughout his entire adult life. But the Clintons have been around a long time. And, they've built up these relationships over a long period of time. I think Madeleine Albright and Gloria Steinem embarrassed themselves. And I think things like that, where they're so overconfident in a certain way that they undermine themselves. But to some extent, there's not a lot you can do about that, because the Clintons have been around a long time. I don't know what to say about. I mean, I have a lot of faith that things are changing generationally too, but a lot of that is in the cultural realm, not necessarily the economic realm. This generation is much more tolerant of differences between individuals, but not necessarily ready for a vast collective movement to change society. So, I don't know the answer to that.
Free education.
What's that?
Free education. College.
Well, this is why that's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. And, you know, some of my colleagues say, well, it'll be a problem because then whenever there's no never mind about that, right? It's on the table now to talk about education as a right of all people. Now, I frankly think the notion that everybody should go to college is nuts. You know, we don't need, I mean, we don't need more of those people, you know? But frankly, right now, we create no alternative paths in the United States. So, I mean, if we were serious about this, we would be talking about how do we create alternative paths. But the fact that Bernie has put the student debt issue and the cost of college education right on the table is brilliant. Yes, and this is going to be it. One more round.
Well, I don't want to fight with my wife. Somebody up here asked a question I don't think you touched on, and that
What was
was for somebody that opposes Bernie and the ideals, these are things that would help them, would help the working class. And why are the working class opposed to things that would help them?
Oh, okay, because, I think I did answer it, but it's because it's not always about economics. I mean, I'm an economist, I think the economy is important, but it's not always about economics. It's about culture. It's about ethnicity. It's about race. It's about gender. It's about sexuality. It's about all kinds of other things. And so I don't think they're irrational. They may be voting against their economic interests, but they're voting their cultural interests. And for those people, culture matters more to them. Because, don't forget, there's this ethos that if you work hard, and most of the people I know who fit in this category are hard-working people, all right? If you work hard, you're going to be okay, and you can't depend on anyone else anyway. So the notion that somebody's going to be better or worse for me economically doesn't always make sense to those people. It's about who looks like me. Who looks like my family? Who would I want to sit down and have a beer with? Now, that doesn't mean they're irrational. It means they're just voting on a different set of criteria than you are. Now I have to let your wife ask the question.
When Obama ran as president, he got all the youth very excited and voted for him.
Right.
Well, they felt they did their job, and it got quiet.
Right.
They said, okay, we've done it, you do what you have to do. If we take this movement by Bernie, and we've got to a certain point, do we dissipate, that you brought up? How do we keep the movement going?
Well, this guy right here is going to do that. That's been taken care of. Well, let's take one more round and we'll be done. Yeah?
I'm not sure it's a question, but to Sally's comment, I mean, I feel the same hope that you feel about younger people, but it's tempered by a fear that we're going to screw it up because we're ready to take over the reins. So to the young people in the audience, it's important to get on Facebook and be in touch with your friends. They have to vote in the primaries. They can't wait.
That's a good comment.
I think it also is troublesome that the turnouts at the primaries and the Republican primaries and caucuses is breaking records in each state. And unless the Democrats get behind it, there's no use even discussing it. Even half the vote.
People have to vote. I mean, I think that's a very good comment that you know, young people got to get their friends out to the polls. I mean, that's very important. I don't necessarily have too much trust in polling data, but right now, Bernie beats anybody the Republicans put up. So I'm not that worried about the general election. And people will come out, you know, and there will be that enthusiasm. But I think the comment about, you know, getting the word out to your friends is very important. One last thing, this gentleman right here.
Well, I took a course some time ago that said perception is reality. So the perception of a lot of these people that they have of what's going on is not necessarily reality, and that could be controlled, I think, by the media. So to what extent do you think the media actually will control the elections? Is it more important than the real economics that we were discussing here?
Well, look at the New York Times coverage of the Bernie Sanders campaign. It has been awful. I mean, really awful. That article the other day about how Clinton is so far ahead of the delegate race, that was all baloney. It's just all baloney. That's the newspaper of record, right? I mean, this isn't like the good 5-cent cigar, which is a fine paper. So I think the corporate media is a big problem. And of course, the right wing has created this myth that there's a liberal media, but the right wing controls radio. So I think the media is a huge problem. And that's why events like this, you know, where we talk to each other, it's like Occupy, you know? I mean, I remember going down and seeing Jonathan there, you know? I mean, just some guy from South Kingstown that I knew. And you go to a place like that, or you come to something like this, or you go to the event Friday night that the South County group is running, and you know you're not alone. You're with other people, and you filter out that nonsense. And the thing that has changed, and that's why the Facebook comment is important, there's an ability now to get around. You can do it, right? And in the younger generation, like, nobody watches TV. Right? That's for old people. The notion that you would watch a television show at a particular time, who does that? Right? So there are now ways around the corporate media that especially are accessible